party to land at the Waterkloof Airforce base in 2013. Martins also denied that former President Jacob Zuma was involved in the controversial landing for the guests of that wedding. He was giving testimony this morning at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry in Johannesburg. Martins was the transport minister at the time of the controversial landing, and he admitted to having met the Gupta brothers several times. He says that one of the Gupta brothers, Rajesh Tony Gupta, made the request to land at OR Tambo International Airport, even requesting that a welcoming ceremony be held. Martins says that this request was denied. Martins, however, says that neither him nor the president gave the green light for the landing and insists that he was unaware of the plans.
The decision was that we could not grant that permission.
Yes.
First and foremost, technically, I did not have the authority to do so because on the plane landing site, on the tarmac site, the authority governing there is the Department of Home Affairs, where they have to stamp passports and process individuals arriving into the country.
Yes. And then after you told them, what was Mr. Tony Gupta's reaction?
His reaction was that, are you really denying the guests of the president and the friends of the president the opportunity to have this welcoming ceremony there? Yes. And we said that irrespective of whose guests or friends it is, permission cannot be granted.
Did you at any stage give any instruction to anyone to allow the landing of that aircraft at Waterkloof?
I did not give anyone instructions to allow the landing because, as I said in my statement, the Ministry of Transport or the Minister of Transport does not have authority over Waterkloof Air Base. It falls under the Department of Defense and Military Veterans.
Now, the Chief of Air Traffic Navigation Services, ATNS, Hennie Marais, has directly contradicted some of the evidence that was given by former Transport Minister Ben Martins before the State Capture Commission in Joburg. Martins said that he was informed by an official from the ATNS that the aircraft did not have the necessary permit ahead of the infamous Gupta wedding plane landing at Waterkloof Airforce Base. Martins further said that he mandated that official to issue a fine, but the chief of ATNS says they didn't issue fines.
In my career with ATNS, I have become aware of flights that did not have foreign operator permits. The reporting thereof is sent to the Civil Aviation Authority and the Department of Transport. Imposition of fine, ATNS does not impose any fines to anybody. We're here to provide a service and to levy a tariff for that service. There's no recollection of any fines or of reporting to the minister.
All right, so two different versions, and they can't both possibly be right. And now I guess that's what the judge's going to have to figure out. Our reporter Manqoba Mchunu has been following the commission and joins us now to give us more details on what transpired today. So, two witnesses telling different versions. Take us through the events of today. Who was first? Was it Martins or Marais?
Well, Peter, it was Martins that gave testimony first, of course, also testifying about, his role in the whole controversial Gupta landing. And it basically denies the fact that he had any knowledge of the Gupta landing at Waterkloof Airport Base. And what he says, though, is that he does, however, concede to knowing that there was going to be a landing by the Gupta family in 2013. He says that there was a meeting that was held in February 2013. That's 6 months after he was appointed as the transport minister, where he met with one of the Gupta brothers, Rajesh Tony Gupta, as well as the former protocol chief, Ben Kolwani, who's now the ambassador. You recall that he's the man that was ultimately fingered as being the one who had been involved or took the fall in some words, for that Waterkloof Airforce base landing. So he says that he was there as well as the acting CEO of the AXA, or the Airports Company South Africa at the time, Bongani Maseko. And he says during that meeting, that's when the Gupta brothers had made their presentation to say that they wanted the plane to land at OR Tambo International Airport. And their request at that time was that they also want there to be sort of like a welcoming party, a big ceremony to welcome the guests who were traveling to the wedding. So at the time, he says that this was simply not feasible because OR Tambo is a busy international airport, and to have a ceremony being held at the tarmac of the airport was simply not going to be able to be done at that point. So he says he denied this request by Tony Gupta, of course, who was very unhappy at the time about that decision that he had taken. He says that at some point he even asked him, are you sure that you want to deny the former president's friends from coming to the wedding or from landing here at this airport? And he says that he simply just stood his ground at the time, and he says that no, you cannot land here. It's simply not, in terms of security, you cannot land at OR Tambo. He says, according to him, that was the last he heard of this particular landing, until then he heard through newspaper reports that there was a landing that took place at the Waterkloof Air Base.
All right, and now this is where ATNS now comes into play. Tell us about this contradiction, because Marais is saying something else happened to the testimony of Ben Martins.
The contradiction comes, Peter, because now, during his testimony, Martin says that he had received a call when that landing happened on the 30th of April 2013. And he says he received a call from an official from ATNS, and that official had informed him that a plane had been landing without the proper documentation and so forth. And he says that when he spoke to this official, he was surprised, first of all. But he says that he then instructed that, of course, they must follow procedure with regards as to what to do with this plane. So they must issue a fine. And a fine, he says, in the tune of about 80,000 rand. So he says the official agreed to carry out that fine. But, of course, Marais is saying that as the ATNS, their role is only simply to look at air traffic and only to deal with how planes follow a particular flight plan, and also the safety of the aeroplanes on air. So he says that at no point do they deal with issues of fine. So basically this now contradicts what Ben Martins had earlier claims, that that official had promised that there will be a fine that will be paid. And
he also denied that the president knew anything about this, but how would he have authority to know what the president knew or not?
Well, of course, that was one of the submissions that he made. He says that, of course, he himself, first of all, does not have anything to do with the landing. He says that he did not give any instruction to anybody for that plane to land at Waterkloof, and he also went on to venture into the president. Of course, he reports to the president, and of course, he would have known as the transport minister, we assume, that if there was such an arrangement that was made. But, I mean, if he says that he only heard of this landing through the newspapers, I guess, you know, there are questions there as well. So he says that the president was totally not involved. He says that there was no instruction from the president. But of course...
was he not involved, or he didn't know? I mean, there's two different things, because it's hard to imagine that Tony Gupta would say, are you going to deny a friend of the president's landing?
Well, Peter, by default, anything that does implicate Ben Martins as the transport minister will automatically also implicate the president himself. So I don't know whether he was being careful with regards to his testimony on the president's involvement, but he says that the president was not involved, and that's where he stands.
Manqoba, that's where we'll leave it. Thanks very much indeed for giving us an update on what happened today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.